Chapter 49. Murder Mystery. The night wore on. An auction took place, where several art pieces, historical artifacts, jewelry, and rare items were sold. All the proceeds went to charities selected by the buyers. It was the opportune time for the wealthy to show off how generous they really were. As a result, even ordinary items ended up being sold for millions. And the Kang family PR team made sure to capture these moments, ready to send out all kinds of glorified press releases the next day. After the main auction was over, performances from renowned Korean orchestras and elite students from the Korean National University of Arts occurred on the stage. People danced, drank, and socialized. I watched these activities from a velvet seat near the raised platform. Naturally, all the children at the event had gravitated around me, some from natural curiosity and others because they were forced to by their parents. This crowd included the children of socialites, politicians, and members of Kanmung. 16-year-old Mung Bae, 14-year-old Kang Ara, Kang Wook's granddaughter, 17-year-old Kang Beom-seok, Seo faction's grandson, and 16-year-old Kang Chul, Dawn faction grandson, all sat around me. It was funny seeing a group of teenagers suck up to an 8-year-old. "So what was the princess like? Are you actually in love?" Kang Chul asked with a smile on his face, bringing out his dimples. Long gone was his baby fat. Now he was a dashing teen, and I noticed a few girls stealing glances at him. Regardless of what the press say, I don't believe it for a second. I gave Chul a sly, side-eyed look. "What, are you jealous? She is pretty, isn't she?" Chul went a bit red in the face. Jealous? Why would I be jealous of a freaking 8-year-old? Sure, she's pretty, but she's a kid. I'm just saying you can admit that you're being forced by the family head. None of us would judge you for that. I smirked. Is that what you want me to say? Do you want a bad rumor to spread? I'm sure the people in your faction would love that, but sadly, I'm not being forced. I wasn't trying to make a rumor, though. Chul pouted. You used to be so cute, but nowadays you say some really jaded stuff. Over the years, Kang Chul had somehow managed to remain as childish as the day I'd met him. Kang Beom-seok laughed and pushed up his thick glasses. He's not jaded. He's just more mature than you are, and he understands how our household works. Don't worry, though. We all know you're too dumb to actually try and spread a rumor like that. The group burst into laughter, and Kang Chul's face became even redder with embarrassment. I'm not dumb. Really? Kang Ara smirked. Your midterm results say otherwise. My dad even told me not to hang out with you too much because stupid is infectious. The children burst into more laughter. I watched with amusement as they pecked at the weakest member like vultures. As Chul began to tremble and his eyes became wet, I intervened. Exam scores aren't everything. I cut through their malicious giggles and put a comforting hand on Chul's shoulder. He may not be academically smart, but he paints well. One of his pieces sold tonight for 10 billion chats. Last time I checked, all of you were living off your family's reputation and money. I gave a sweet smile. Don't be so mean to Chula. One day you might be begging him for favors. It was Beom-seok's turn to go red in the face. All the other children didn't know what to say. A burst of uneasy, dry laughs spread, along with some nods of agreement. Chul stared at me with big puppy dog eyes, giving me a thumbs up as he whispered, "You're the best." From the corner of my eye, I noticed Beom-seok glaring at me, but I ignored him. I didn't need to be on Beom-seok's good side. I was already the king among this generation. They followed the pace that I set. He was the one that needed to kiss up to me, not the other way around. While the children smiled and sided with me on the surface, I could smell the envy on their breath. Beom-seok, especially, was wishing for my downfall. He deeply coveted everything I had, and always made sly and malicious comments behind my back. If I ever made a mistake, I knew he would come with schadenfreude. Kang Chul was the only one I liked amongst the Kang family children. He did say thoughtless things, but he had no ambition for power and was a rather innocent lamb amongst wolves. Also, I quite enjoyed his art, and we had been able to maintain a good relationship over the years. As expected, Beom-seok grinned. You're right, Chul is a great artist, and exam results aren't everything. Some people can go to elite schools and still end up with a boring career and no money. Sorry, Chul, I didn't intend to be mean. His apology sounded so fake that everyone there felt uncomfortable. Chul actually smiled and forgave him. "No worries, I know you were only joking." I rolled my eyes at this exchange and went back to watching the stage. During a pretty dance number, I noticed something in the corner of my eyes that surprised me. Near the exit, Miss Harin was talking to Min Ho. They spoke briefly and then left hall together. I wasn't the only one that noticed this, so did Junki. And after quickly downing some wine, he practically chased after them. What was going on? I wanted to follow as well, but they had already disappeared and the children were practically keeping me seated while chatting nonsense. After some time, curiosity got the better of me and I stood up, stretching none of them. I said, "I need some fresh air. I'm off for a stroll." To my surprise, Meng Bei stood up and said, "Let me come too. I need some fresh air." I raised an eyebrow, but I didn't refuse her. "Sure, let's go." I grabbed her hand and headed to the door. Other kids in the group seemed like they also wanted to go with us. I left with Meng Bei so quickly that they lost their chance. In a way, it was more lively outside than inside the hall. The lanterns were still brightly lit and servants were wandering around, along with guests who were chatting and drinking under the moon. No matter where I looked, I couldn't see Min Ho, Miss Harin, or Junki. I was about to aimlessly wander about, looking for them, but Meng Bei pulled at my hand. "Can we talk?" I raised another eyebrow at her. "We're talking now." She gave a small smile. "You're right. So, I was wondering, can I ask for your advice?" "My advice about what?" I want to be the heir to the Meng family. You know, women in our families are usually cast aside or treated like ornaments and never taken seriously. My great-grandmother was the first only female head of the Meng group, but she had to sacrifice a lot to be treated with respect. She began to ramble. "I've always admired my great-grandmother, and I'm the only child, and after my mother died, my dad swore to never remarry. I thought I was guaranteed the position of being head of the family after my dad, but now my cousins are vying for my spot, and people treat me like I'm invisible. Every day I feel like I'm losing my place, and Dad and Grandpa just tell me that I need to solve my own problems. At this rate, I'll never be able to reach my great-grandmother's level." "Are you going to get to the point?" I sighed. Her low voice and all that rambling were getting on my nerves. "Can we sit down first?" She gestured to a far-off bench. It was located in front of another guest house being used by the attendees of the fundraiser. "Fine," I sighed. Once we sat down, she began pouring her heart out to me. "I want to be the next head of my family. I want to gain so much respect that there is no other option except me. I want to do what you did. You were a bastard child, and everyone in Kang family were against you. And now, you're the most influential child in the whole group. You've made people recognize your name worldwide, and you've garnered immeasurable respect and love from the whole household. I want to do what you did. Please teach me." I mulled over her request in my brain. It would be bothersome, but strictly speaking, there were many ways she could reach her goals, and I could easily put her in my debt. That way, when she did inherit her position from her father, essentially I would be the real leader, and she would be my puppet. I would be in control of both the Kang and the Meng family. The offer was tempting. I was just about to respond to her when the unexpected happened. A body fell, the sound of bones breaking on concrete, the splat of a brain turning to mush and popping out of a cracked skull, the oozing of blood. Meng Bei let out a piercing scream as the body plunged to the ground right in front of us, and blood splashed on her pump. After her loud shriek, she promptly fainted on the bench. As others who heard the scream began to crowd around, I walked up to the corpse and I peered at the face. It was messy, but I easily recognized him. It was Kang Junki. Chapter 50. Murder Mystery 4. The first time I saw someone fall from a building was the year 1999 in my previous life. It was a rainy day. I was in London, and there was this large crowd gathered and the police standing by as this young lady stood at the edge of a 5-story apartment block rooftop. She was there 3 hours, just staring down, contemplating whether she should jump or not. The spectators, who were initially excited, filming on camcorders, calling friends on their Nokia, or just shouting at her, quickly grew bored. Eventually, people left, and even the police grew tired of trying to convince her to come down. I, however, did not grow bored. In fact, I got more excited with every second. The will she or won't she of it all kept me on the edge of my seat. It was more entertaining than any performance. And then the finale. Just as she turned around, seeming to change her mind, a strong gust of wind blew. She lost her balance and tumbled to her death. It was over in less than 10 seconds, but my eyes remember it, frame by frame. Her scream, the way her hands reached out trying to grab hold of anything, and the dull thud as her body missed the life net being held by the firefighters, by mere centimeters. Her head hit the ground first and split open on the concrete like an egg. It was a sight that I would never forget. When I looked at Junki's corpse, I had a similar feeling. I wouldn't forget this sight. The frozen expression of horror on his bloody and torn face. The arrogant twinkle in his eyes that had annoyed me mere moments ago was now gone and replaced with a blank stare. I instinctively stepped closer to his body to get a better look. Immediately, I smelt alcohol. He was practically drenched in it. In one of his hands was a broken bottle that was clenched in his fist. That was odd. I had seen him leave the Diamond Hall only 30 minutes prior, and he hadn't been drunk at all. In fact, he was practically sober the whole night. This was clearly staged. At that point, I was grabbed by a nearby servant. It was one of my nannies, Han. She covered my eyes and yelled, "Don't look! Don't look at that!" Crowd gathered. People yelled in horror at the corpse. At that point, Miss Ha-Ren ran out, running from the entrance of that guest building. She huffed and puffed as if she had run a marathon. Her face was the picture of horror when she saw Junki. Her whole body trembled as she muttered, He fell off the balcony while drinking. Oh my God! Oh my God!" I peeked through Han's fingers and I watched as Miss Ha-Ren collapsed on the ground and threw up. She was definitely putting on quite the show. Hearing all the chaos, soon all the guests emerged from the Diamond Hall to see what had happened. Shocked mutterings and gasps filled the air. The police were on the scene within minutes, and they quickly cordoned off the area. I didn't get to see much of what happened after that. Minho appeared before me and took me from Han. "The young master shouldn't see any of this. I will take him to bed." "Ah, yes," she said weakly, giving me one final hug before she handed me to Minho. As he whisked me away to my quarters, the last thing I saw as we left was Kong Sung staring at Junki's corpse as they zipped it up in a black bag, and it was loaded into the back of an ambulance. Madame Kang was hugging the legs of the stretcher, screaming, "No! My son! My baby! No!" There was no expression on Song's face, but I did see a single tear roll from his eye before his expression hardened. That single tear was like cracks in his armor. It revealed the sad man underneath that tough demeanor. He really had loved Junki a lot. His heart looked like it was breaking. At that time it was a feeling I couldn't understand. Minho didn't say much as we walked back. There was only one sentence he uttered as he tucked me into bed. "Sorry it was so messy, but it had to be done." I grabbed his arm wanting him to tell me more. But he shook his head. "Tomorrow. Right now some loose ends need to be tied up." And with that he left, leaving me confused. Minho had enough self-discipline to not kill Junki in such a public and brash way, unless it wasn't him, but his mother. But why would he cover for her? And why would she want to harm Junki? My brain was buzzing, but I guess I was tired because I quickly fell asleep. I woke up to quietness as Minho gently shook me. It was still a bit dark out, and there wasn't even the chirping of birds yet. Next to Minho was Kong Sung, who simply watched me and said nothing. I had never seen that man so silent before. Like earlier, he wore the same hardened expression on his face. Soon I was dressed in a black morning suit to match Song. 2 black bands were put on my arm, and Kong Sung quietly picked me up and took me to a car waiting outside. The air was somber. All the decorations from the night before had been taken down. At a glance, all the servants were now dressed in black. As we walked to the vehicle, nearby workers gave us solemn looks, and they lowered their heads. The picture of grief and respect. I wanted to laugh. I had never been good in serious situations, especially at funerals. I always found the whole thing rather laughable. People who probably hated you your whole life and said the worst shit about you suddenly became your best friend at a funeral. I knew most of the staff deeply despised Junki. I had listened to their gossip, but now look at them. Even in death, you can't escape appearances and ego. I decided to resist the urge to laugh by burying my face in Kang Sung's blazer. To onlookers who saw my trembling shoulders, they probably thought I was crying, but in fact, I was desperately holding my breath to prevent any giggle. To my surprise, Kang Sung stroked my head. It seemed he also thought I was crying, as he comforted me. There. It'll be okay. Don't be sad. It'll be okay. To be honest, I felt like I should be the one comforting him. Truly looked like he was holding back tears. He hid it decently, but not well enough. When the car rolled out of the estate, the press was on us like hound. Cameras flashed so intensely that I was blinded, and for a moment we couldn't drive forward at all. But eventually our security pushed them aside, and off we went to the private Kangmung Group funeral hall. This hall was as large as it was bleak. Many people dressed in black were seated, talking in lowered voices as they either drank or ate food. At the center of the room was a memorial for Junki, a handsome photo of him surrounded by a grand and lavish floral arrangement of white chrysanthemum. Incense burned under his photo. Standing to the side of this memorial stand was Madame Kang. She looked drained of all life. She seemed to have aged 3 decades in a single night. When people noticed me, I heard them whisper, "Poor orphan, to lose his father like that and to be the first to see him. As amazing as he is, he's so unlucky. Poor boy." I ignored the pity and gossip. Instead, I walked up to the podium, lit incense, and put it with the other sticks next to Junki's photo. I bowed twice to the deceased. As I bowed, I wondered how no one was suspicious. Funeral was happening so quickly without even an autopsy. I must have missed something while I was asleep. There was no way Kang Sung would not be suspicious, unless he was given overwhelming evidence. The whole thing was an accident. I had a few theories, but I couldn't be sure until I got all the facts from Min Ho. After bowing, I joined Kang Sung and Madame Kang as the chief mourner. The 3-day funeral ensued. Chapter 51, The Killer, a Demon and a Dog. 1. One thing I know about funerals is that if you don't cry, people notice. Even acquaintances that had only met Junki once or twice managed to muster some wet eyes and the odd tear or two whilst bowing at his altar. As I stood there, bored out of my mind, I noticed a few strange looks being thrown my way, as if they were silently saying, "How can the chief mourner be so composed?" So I summoned some tears and wept silently for a while. The moment Madame Kang saw this, she hugged me. Holding on to my chest tightly, she wailed, "Why is God so cruel to us? Bring him back, bring him back." Her tears soaked my shoulder, and her hug was so tight that my chest hurt. On the other hand, Kang Sung was much more composed. His expression was like steel, and he greeted the guests calmly. However, I could see his shoulders tremble every once in a while. He was fighting to keep himself together. Disappointing. Seeing him act like this, once again I felt disillusioned by him. A veil lifted from my eyes. Kang Sung had never been a tall man, but in just a few hours he had shrunk. His usual intense aura was now gone, and he was just so small. No, he had always been small. I was finally seeing the true man behind the facade. He wasn't someone that could see through me. He wasn't a mind reader or a genius. He wasn't the parental figure I had dreamt of in my past life. He was just a man, albeit a rich, powerful, and slightly nasty man, but still a man. Why had I thought any differently? For the 8 years that I had become Kang Ho, I had felt sluggish. My mind was buried and barely there. My thoughts and actions had become childish. I had even started to feel fondness and connections for people that Daniel never would have experienced. I had excused these developments, claiming it was youth, body impacting the mind. But that wasn't it. This mortal shell was slowly stripping away what made me Daniel Slade. It was rejecting me and replacing me with something much more, like the original Kang Ho. Sudden realization made me shiver. I looked around the room at all the insignificant wealthy people. Daniel would never have cared for them. Daniel wouldn't have wanted to be the heir to a rich conglomerate family. Daniel didn't care about power amongst humans. Because humans were beneath him, he was a predator. He would have left this life behind for one that was more covert and swathed in darkness. Getting a small cabin in a secluded area to have fun playing with his mortal toys. I had unironically forgotten that I was a wolf and had started grazing with the sheep. The sensation that I had been ignoring for so long, suddenly in this moment it became clear to me. This life wasn't truly mine. Something was controlling me and the events around me and making me docile and dumb. Why did I accept it so easily? This situation, reincarnating in the book of my last victim. Why did I accept the circumstances without hesitation? I felt a lump in my throat, like something was lodged in there. A pain filled me like I couldn't breathe. Cold sweat fell from my brow as I realized that someone was staring at me from above. I glanced up and large yellow eyes were gazing into mine. Large black wings. The span of the room covered everything in darkness, and an unbelievable sense of helplessness consumed me. "Stop thinking, Slade." Bird croaked. "Hoa, are you okay? You went really pale. Maybe you should sit down." Madame Kang was looking at me with concern. The eyes, the wings, it was all gone. And a second later it was gone from my memory. Why were my fists clenched? I opened my palms and was surprised by how clammy my fingers were. I had the bizarre feeling like I was forgetting something. But I couldn't for the life of me figure out what. I was so close to what, dear? Madame King asked as she checked my temperature. I have no idea. Why did I say that? Something felt off. Something had always felt off. And yet again I was left feeling unsettled. Hundreds of people came to Junki's funeral. Only a handful knew him personally. Most just came for appearances and connections. A regular funeral hall would have been overwhelmed by the sheer amount of visitors, but it was manageable because the Kang family funeral hall was large enough to rival most amateur stadiums. The visitors were separated by sections. One area for direct Kangmung members. Tables were separated by clan and affiliation. Then an area for the distant or branch family relatives, and another area for unrelated visitors. Of course, all were significant figures from various industries. In a way, the networking at the fundraiser was only being continued at the funeral. Parched and bored, I excused myself from welcoming mourners to get some water. Instantly, as if they had been waiting for me to leave Sung's side, a flurry of investors from the unrelated visitors' table approached me. They said the generic lines, "I'm so sorry for your loss," before introducing themselves and waving their business cards in my face. I gave them a gentle, polite smile. "Thank you," while Minho took their cards and put some space between us and them. That was when Miss Ha-rin walked in. I watched as she greeted Sung and Madame Kang and bowed to Junki's altar. Following my gaze, the investors also saw Ha-rin, and they began to gossip. "That's her, the only witness to Kang Junki's accident. I heard she was drinking with Junki when he supposedly fell." "Who is she?" "The wife of Sakite. He's an oil tycoon, but a little rumor going around claims that he also operates a cartel group across South America and the Caribbean. I heard he's a loan shark as well. Pretty nasty guy." I'm not surprised Kang Junki was associated with someone like that. I heard he was doing some very disturbing business over the last 8 years. Shh. We shouldn't say these things in front of the child. They all turned to look at me. Seeing my bright smile, they quickly said their goodbyes, running back to their seats. I barely registered them leave because my mind was buzzing with the new information. This changed everything. As the funeral continued, I met many family members for the first time, from the distant to the estranged. None of the guests surprised me until Junki's older brother, the son who had disowned the Kang family, walked in. The moment he, his wife and son appeared at the door, everyone, hundreds of people, went quiet. In that quietness, they walked up to the podium, bowed towards me, Madame Kang and Sung, and then bowed 3 times before Junki's altar. As they did this, people began to whisper, "I can't believe Kang Hunbin actually showed up." "You mean Song Hunbin? He hasn't been a Kang since his wedding day 15 years ago." "Whatever, I'm shocked he showed up. Junki was his younger brother. Even if he left the family, it would be weirder if he didn't come to his funeral." "Look at Kang Sung's face." I glanced up to see Sung turning purple. He was so angry that he seemed to have forgotten how to breathe. Yet in that anger he seemed unbearably sad. His hands were shaking and his lips firmly pressed together. All he could do was glare. Hunbin seemed to be unfazed by his father's appearance. When he straightened up after bowing, He simply nodded at him and then glanced at me. He gave me a gentle smile that felt like a warm summer breeze. I'm ashamed to only be meeting my nephew now. I wish we could have met under nicer circumstances. Whoos, Madame Kang snorted. Who are you calling nephew? You gave up your rights as my son, so you're not his uncle. You're not Junki's brother either. You're a stranger here. Hanbin sighed. Yes, I know, he gave a tired laugh. Since we're strangers, we should sit in the unrelated visitor area, right, Dad? His teenage son gave a bright and confident grin. He bowed to us and then again to Junki's altar. Let's go sit, Mum, Dad. He grabbed their hands. The strangers are getting out of your face, he announced. As they left to sit at the far end of the hall, Madame Kang skid. How impudent, that brat Song He is as rude as ever. Just as rude as his father. How dare he show up here? Just leave it, let them stay, Sung croaked. Chapter 52. Killer, a Demon and a Dog, 2. Before Kang Sen could get his composure back, Kang Hye-kyo walked in. Ooh, look at your sour face, Dad. I guess Hanbin already did his greetings. Aikyo wasn't alone. By her side were two older women. One was very elegant but had a rather tall neck and a long pointed nose, while the other woman had a rather plain face but very long silky hair that reached her waist. Walking behind them were three men. Haikyo's boyfriend Park Do-hum, another tall man with a curled mustache, and the third was a rather short Japanese man with a gentle expression. What time do you call this? How are my daughters arriving this late to their brother's funeral? The woman with the plain face flinched. Father? Chikashi and I got on a flight the moment we heard the news. As she spoke, her voice got quieter until it was a barely audible mumble. Aikyo pulled her nervous sister closer to her. Zeni just got off a 2-hour flight and barely rested before coming. We all thought it would be better to come together, so we waited for her. Zeni nodded. We came as fast as we could. Her husband, the short Japanese man, greeted Sung politely. Sorry, father-in-law. As Sunny said, we came as fast we could, and both sister-in-laws agreed to wait for us to make an appearance together. All right, I get it. Stop with the needless apology. Do what you need to do and take your seats. Sung exhaustedly waved them aside. Before going to Junki's altar, Haikyo gave me an uncharacteristic hug. When she turned away from me, I noticed a small frown on her face. She seemed annoyed. As she stood up and walked with the rest to her seat, I noticed her exchange a slight nod with Ms. Harin. That was odd. What was the connection between those two? Hadn't they only met last night? My mind began to buzz. Junki's murder was becoming less clear to me. My prior suspicions became further confused when the chief of Seoul Police came to the funeral. After bowing at Junki's altar, he began whispering into Sung's ear. All I heard were two words, drug cover-up, before Sung excused himself, leaving with the officer to continue their conversation in private. I closed my eyes and began to piece together the facts that I had heard and gossip I had picked up. Minho, I muttered. My butler was by my side faster than the breeze. I looked towards Madame Kang. I'm going to get some fresh air. I feel stuffy. She nodded, letting me go. Normally, the chief mourner wasn't allowed to leave their duties to someone else, but considering I was so young, they could be a bit lax with the traditions. Wordlessly, Minho carried me from the hall to a more empty private garden. Near some gorgeously arranged rose bushes, I sat on an oak bench. I smelt the fresh sweet air, touched the slight morning dew on the petals, and observed a honeybee jump from bud to bud before I turned to Minho. This is my guess. Father came back, not just because he ran out of money, but because he got involved with a very dangerous man. He wasn't just addicted to gambling, but also drugs, and that put him in huge amounts of debt with a cartel, specifically a cartel run by oil tycoon Sakite, Miss Harin's husband. Due to his identity as a Kang, they probably gave him enormous loans, and being the fool he was, took it and lost everything. So he comes back to Korea. I collected my thoughts, with promises that he'll give them what he owes. Miss Harin came with him not as a guest but to supervise him and make sure he delivers. Of course, I muse aloud, this all isn't a coincidence. Junki didn't just happen to get addicted to gambling and drugs. From the start he was set up by Haikyo. She worked with the Sakit cartel and asked them to put Junki in that scenario so that he would need to either beg Grandpa or her for the money or resources to make up for it. If Junki begged to Grandpa and the family, his reputation would further go down along with mine for being his son, and the position of heir would be up for debate again. And if Junki begged Haitio, then she would have him under her thumb. Either way, she would only benefit from it. But that's where I get confused. Why murder him? All those benefits disappear with him gone. It doesn't make sense. Something unexpected happened that night, and you saw it, tell me. Minho nodded and then sighed. You had a few things right, but you underestimate how much of a piece of shit that dog, your father, was. I never told you, but over the last few years there have been all kinds of stories circulating about him. His gambling, drugs, and various relations with all types of women and men were just the tip of the iceberg. Last night, Minho thought back. I happened to hear Miss Harin's conversation with Sir Kang last night. During the fundraiser, Minho walked around the hall. From a distance he observed Junki and Kangho whilst pouring drinks and handing out champagne to guests. A habit he had picked up from fighting in the Golden Hoof arena was masking his presence. Part of him had died in those fights, and now he roamed the world like a ghost. His steps were barely perceptible to people around him. He was constantly on high alert, poised and ready like an assassin to get rid of someone at a moment's notice. After being set free from the arena over the last 6 years, Minho had also trained diligently with different masters from Golden Hoof, becoming advanced in all kinds of weaponry, stealth techniques, and SAS tactics to make sure he could protect himself and his master. Habitually, he lurked in the shadows of the hall, roaming about quietly when he found himself next to Sir Sung and Miss Harin. He wasn't all that interested in their conversation. He had only moved to this area because it gave him a wider view of his young master Kanho. That's nonsense, Sung shouted. Hearing the sheer rage in Kang's voice, Minho leaned closer to the wall beside the pair. What was happening? He wondered. You heard what I said. Junki promised us $16.5 billion USD and 25% of the Kang family shares. Minho's ears pricked up. That was ridiculous. $16.5 billion seemed like a lot of money, but it wasn't too much for the Kang family. It would set them back a bit, but they had enough secret funds and offshore accounts to supplement that kind of cash. The ridiculous part was the 25% shares. In the Kang family, 40% of the shares were owned by the faction leading the family. In this generation, was the Nam faction. The other factions, Buk, Dong, and Seo, each had 10% of the shares each, while the remaining 30% of shares were divvied up, belonging to various shareholders and partners. From the 40% of the shares that the Nam faction owned, 25% belonged to the head of the family personally, that being Kang Sung. The rest were split between the elders of the family. For example, Haitio, who owned Kyo Entertainment, only had 5% of the Kang family shares. In this family, shares were power. Junki doesn't have those types of shares. He won't ever have those shares. This pledge void. There was the sound of ripping paper as Kang Sung tore the contract in half. Unfortunately, Kang Sung see, if he can't pay what he promised, then he has to give us something of equivalent value. Harin took out another copy of the contract from her handbag. She turned to the last page. Clause 49. If the borrower cannot pay the amount promised in Section A, then they must deliver material of equivalent value that both parties must agree upon. Sung sighed after reading it. He gestured to his secretary William, who took the contract. So what material do you think would be equivalent? Well, that can be determined at a later date. Just see it as you owing my family a debt, and we could call on this debt whenever we want, or whenever we want. Sung looked like he wanted to punch Harin in the face, but he held himself back. In a venomous tone, he said, Your husband has messed with the wrong family. He may be powerful in his own circles, but that power can't compare to even the tail of Kang Meng. Harin laughed and shrugged. I'm aware you could ruin us easily. We know about your Golden Hoof connections, and only fools don't know what your family is capable of. That's why we're not pushing for you to give those shares or the money. Just see it as owing us a favor, and owing Haitio a favor. Haitio? Your daughter has the ability to be the next heir. My family backs her entirely." Hearing this, Singh laughed out loud. "Of course it's that little vixen. She really will do anything to be seen." "Fine," Singh stood up. "Let's leave this as us owing you a favor. And as for Haikyo, I'll have a word with her. That doesn't concern you." Minho felt disgust hearing this conversation. He never had expectations of his mother. But to think she could be just as awful as the Kang family, even threatening a beast like Kang Singh. Disappointment filled him. But he didn't have time to dwell on it. He heard Kang Ho say, "I'm feeling a little tired. I'm going to sit with Minho for a bit." And he pushed all other thoughts aside as he ran to his young master. Chapter 53, The Killer, a Demon and a Dog, 3. As Kang Ho spoke, he tried to pay attention, but Minho found himself being distracted by Miss Ha-Rin, who was walking around. "Who is she to you? You look similar," Kang Ho asked, although looking at his intelligent eyes, Minho already guessed that he knew. Feeling guilty and ashamed, Minho admitted, My mother. She's my biological mother." "I see," the young master nodded. They spoke for a bit longer about the topic, or more people came to seek Kang Ho's attention. And soon the young master was watching the fundraiser events with the other children. Minho stood back and watched the children along with the other nannies and au pairs. From the corner of his eye, he noticed Kang Sung speaking to Junki. Whatever Kang Sung was saying was making Kang Junki pissed. His expression became more and more twisted the longer they spoke. As he observed this, Minho noticed that someone was staring right at him. It was Miss Ha-Rin. She slowly approached him, cautiously reaching out to him. But then she second-guessed her actions, dropped her hand. "It's been a long time since I last saw you. The last time was when you handed in your resignation and quit cleaning my house in Busan, after we gave you that referral to Gangmeng. You look like you've been well." Minho stared at her, his expression blank. She fidgeted under his gaze. You know who I am, don't you?" Minho nodded slowly. He didn't say anything, but his mind was screaming with question. He was suspicious and wary of her. "Of course you did. You weren't that young when your father and I divorced. You wouldn't forget me. The same way your sister and I didn't forget you. We didn't know how to bring it up when you started working for us. And She sighed. "This is all probably far too late. But I wanted you to know that I never knew about your father's death. Not until much later, and by then, you were already an adult and doing your own thing. If I had known earlier." "You had known what?" Minho's eyes glinted. He felt a well of emotions that he couldn't describe. I would have been there for you. Let's go somewhere more private and discuss this." She headed towards the door, and Minho, forgetting his duty in the heat of the moment, left with. They walked to her guest room in silence. The room was large, cozy, and lavishly decorated, befitting of room in a guest house on the Kang family estate. The balcony door was open, leading to the night sky. Ha-Rin gestured to an ornate armchair next to a warm fire. "Sit down, Minho. Let's catch up." She put down a wine glass in front of him, popped open a bottle, and also unscrewed a glass of soju. She offered both to him. "Pick your poison." He smiled. It was at that moment that Junki burst in. "You're not only snitching to my father, you're also snitching to the fucking butler now," he screamed. Ha-Rin's nose wrinkled with annoyance. "Snitching? Do you think this is some child's game, and how dare you burst into my room like this?" "Burst into your room? I am Kang Junki, heir to the fucking Kang family. This is my property. This is my room. I have every right to be here. You don't tell me where I can or can't go." "All right, then heir to the Kang family. Where is my money? Has the heroin you've been taking made you forget how much you bloody owe me?" "So you go to my father just because of that? I told you I'll get you the money. $16.5 billion isn't an issue. And once I take over the family, the shares are a small matter. And even if I don't get to control the family, Ho is my son. He will give me the shares." Ha-Rin snorted. "He'll just give them to you? Wow, how did someone so stupid come from the Kang family? It's laughable. And $16.5 billion is a small matter? The businesses that you still own in the family only amount to a value of $500 million at most. Even if you liquidated that, you still wouldn't have enough. Just where would you get the money?" Ha, you just don't know how the world works. So many rich creeps are ready to throw away billions for just a few pictures. Getting money is easy. Junti laughed darkly. RN raised an eyebrow in confusion. Pictures of what exactly? Of Kang-ho. I got offered $20 billion just for a set of photos of him. Of course not ordinary photos, but I'm sure he'd do his best for Daddy. Minho's blood ran cold. Did he hear that correctly? Was Junti openly admitting that he was going to use his son for child porn? Splash. Wow, you are seriously a piece of shit. Haikyo was standing behind Junti with the soju and wine bottle in her hands. She had grabbed them and poured them all over him. Why does a fucker like you even get the opportunity to call himself heir? She mocked. You bitch. Junti screamed. He jumped, leaping for Haikyo, but she easily dodged him. Stand still, you bitch. In your dreams, dickhead. Enraged, Junti grabbed the wine bottle that Haikyo had dropped and smashed it against the table. He began to wave around the jagged, sharp glass. Haren sighed. Come on, Junti, stop this, you're being pathetic. Who are you to tell me what to do? He ran at Haren. Minho moved her to the side and skillfully tripped Junti. This would have normally resulted in a simple fall, but behind Minho was the open balcony, and when Junti tripped, he fell, launching himself head first out of the window. Haikyo trembled as she heard him yell, and then the sickening thud below, followed by a few shrieks. What the fuck did that idiot just do? Crap, it's obvious he fell from my room, Haren muttered. I need to go control the situation. She slapped her face a few times and then burst into realistic tears. With a panicked expression, she ran down the stairs and out of the guest house. And that's what happened. Minho finished his story. If I had it my way, he would have died in a lot more pain than he did. Instead, he went almost instantly. This all felt so weird to me. I understood Minho's story. It made sense, but the whole thing felt so anticlimactic to me. Was that it? So unsatisfying. What was all the build-up for and the suspicion? This wasn't the first time this had happened to me. Youngmyung's death, Bong Chon-sa being adopted by the Dragon Group, and now Junti's death. Every time I had my eyes on key character that I wanted to destroy, that prey was snatched from me. Every time. If it was someone insignificant, it didn't matter, but if I had grand plans for murder, it would always go up in smoke. It was like some creature. No, this world was stopping me from having fun. Unbeknownst to me, a demon smiled from above. Chapter 54. The Forgotten Bet. 1. No punishment would be sufficient for him. He has no sense of guilt, regret, or love. What is he? Surely not a human? Pure parts of his soul have been stamped out. In fact, it's more like they were never there to begin with. This creature is not something we should call mortal. It must be a defective product. And we can't put it back in the life pool. It should not be allowed on the same plane as the living. Send it to the demons. Make him their kin. He would make a splendid punisher. Making it a punisher would be a gift for the thing, not a punishment. It still needs to pay for its countless sins, or there is no justice. I have an idea. From the large pillars of light, a grotesque creature with yellow eyes and fangs longer than my arm walked out. Its tridactyl feet scratched the marbled floor as it approached me. Why don't we repair the soul? Bring back the purity it lost, give it the guilt it doesn't feel, and then it can be punished. I felt all eyes on me, and I grinned. Bring it on, but let's make a wager. I want to win something if you fail. Fail? Me? The creature spread its long, crooked black wings as it flung me into the air. This demon does not fail. Bam! Ow! I fell out of bed to the sound of my alarm clock. Minho opened the curtains and smiled at me gracefully. Are you excited for your first day at Trinity High, young master? I groaned. Since Junti's funeral, 7 years had flashed by, and now I was 15. After being homeschooled for most of my formal schooling, now it was finally time for me to make my debut to the world by attending South Korea's most elite and prestigious educational institution, Trinity High School. In all honesty, I didn't really need to attend school. Being a classified genius, I had already passed all of my high school level qualifications years ago. I had even started studying for the bar exam in my free time. However, attending Trinity wasn't about education but networking. It was a tradition that all members of Kanmon attended the school, and it was somewhat like a battleground for the heirs. It was in this school that I would finally meet the novel's protagonist, Song-jae. The anticipation made me quiver. Get up. My bedroom door slammed open and Anastasia walked in. She was already in the navy blue and silver Trinity uniform. She jumped onto my bed, aiming for my neck, and I easily swatted her to the side. She pulled out a knife from her skirt and twirled it in her hands as she aimed for the same spot, but I hit her wrist. She dropped the blade, and I grabbed it whilst pinning her down and pressing the metal to her pale throat. Yawning, "I think you're getting slower." She glared at me. "You're just getting faster." A deep chuckle came from my throat as I played with her blonde hair. "Then you're going to have to try harder," I teased. Minho cleared his throat and stared at us awkwardly. "Get ready, young master. You don't want to be late." "Yeah, get ready, young master," Anastasia mocked. Irritated, I kicked her off the bed. Anastasia had moved to the Kang estate about a month ago because she insisted on going to the same school as me. Every year for the last 7 years, she would spend a week in Korea, and I would spend a week with her family in Austria, and it was a constant back and forth. We would play our usual games whenever we saw each other, and Anastasia was becoming a very skilled hunter. She always managed to surprise me. Recently, she had become very competitive with me, always trying to fight me or outdo me, but she was all bark and no bite. I hadn't spent my years lazily. I had built hubs all over the world. With the help of Golden Hoof, I now had an extended network of playrooms. In every location I visited, I marred the land with blood and fear. However, no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. "Look at that frown." Anastasia pinched my cheeks. "Did you have that weird dream again?" Weird dream? Yes, that dream. I could never remember the contents, but I always remembered that demon's face, those yellow eyes and fangs. Every time I had that dream, I felt like I was losing a game, and I hated to lose. I nodded slowly. "Yep, the same old dumb dream. Don't worry, I feel like I'm close to solving it soon." "What do you mean?" "I just have a feeling." Now then, I opened my bathroom door. As I brushed my teeth, I smiled at the person that was hung from the ceiling. Their blood dripped slowly into the shower. When they saw me, the figure writhed and trembled. "Please, please let me die," they moaned. The person didn't really resemble a human anymore. Their flesh had been burnt off slowly over the last few years. Skin peeled, and head shaved, and genitals chopped off. They had been starved so much that they were barely skin and bones. Yet they clung on to life, 'cause I wouldn't let them die. Who would have thought that this used to be that maid Chahunha? I'd been torturing her personally for the last 7 years and it never got boring. But she was beginning to stink. My nose wrinkled. "Maybe I should throw you out soon. At this rate, you're already rotting. Not even dogs would chew on your bones." Anastasia spun the rope around and made Chahunha spin. She groaned and vomit fell from her lips. "Ugh." Anastasia scoffed. "You've had this thing for too long. You really need to get rid of it and find a new long-term toy." She was right. Soon I would meet a great new toy, Song-jae. He should be a lot more fun to torture than this hag. I took my toothbrush from my mouth. I pulled Hunha's body towards me and stared her in the eyes. "Then fun." I laughed. She whimpered. I took the blunt edge of my toothbrush and used a considerable amount of strength to lodge it through her throat. I pulled it out and the blood gushed from her neck. Despite it messily splattering around the bathroom, I still held her face to mine and stared into those eyes until the light turned dim and her soul had left. I dropped her and she slammed to the floor. "Now we're going to be late. I have to clean the blood you got on my blazer." Anastasia moaned. "That sounds like a you problem." I smirked as I hopped into the shower. Minho and some of his underlings started to clean the bathroom while I showered, and Anastasia's personal assistant got her a new blazer. When I came out, the bathroom was yet again sparklingly clean. I felt considerably excited as I put my uniform on. Time for school. Chapter 55, Forgotten Bet 2. Trinity High, the elite of the elite, with a history as long and powerful as institutions like Eton. 100% of Trinity High graduates were guaranteed admission into the most elite higher educational institutions around the world, from Yale to Oxford. That also included the Sky Schools. South Korea's top universities, Seoul National University, Korea University, and Yonsei University, known as SKY. Admission into any of these universities would set an individual for a life of success, wealth, and mighty connection. Trinity High was truly a dream ticket to a good life. However, it was mostly only accessible to the super rich. Tuition for one term to study at the school for a regular day student who lived off campus was worth $350,000. However, not many students lived off campus due to the remote location of the school. Hence, it was mostly a boarding school. Board students paid upwards of $500,000 per term, depending on their grade, specialities, and merit. Trinity High was a hub of wealthy predators, all filled with inflated egos and a hyper-vision of their own self-importance. A place where world leaders, powerful conglomerate heads, politicians, and the most corrupt scum of the earth would be born. Clearly, place for me. Anastasia and I were to be boarding at the school. Our things had already been shipped there the day before, so we got into the limousine with only our uniforms and phones on our person. Of course, we had a grand sending-off. All 4,400 of the Kang family estate staff had turned up to wave us away. As if I were some K-pop idol, they held neon signs screaming, "Have fun, young master. We'll miss you, Kang Ho. Do your best." I gave a wry grin. It was my fault. I had made the staff worship me like some angelic holy figure. The cheers and the tears were to be expected, but that didn't make it any less cringy. I was going to high school, for crying out loud. I wasn't enlisting in the army. So dramatic. Anastasia laughed. They love their little Kang Ho so much. I rolled my eyes at her. She had grown so cheeky over the years. I wondered if she would be so cheeky if I did what I wanted to do to her. Anastasia had been the subject of my fantasies for a while. A most recent fantasy was what I called botfly torture. The larvae of botflies are internal parasites. Some species grow in the host's flesh and others within their gut. Dermatobia hominis is the only species of botfly that parasitize humans. Once a veterinarian friend of mine told me that the one thing they hated the most was removing a botfly from the flesh of animals. The larvae would form and grow under its host's skin and would create the most revolting, bulging, angry cysts. Apparently, it was the most painful and horrifying sight, and removing them was just excruciating. I had been growing my own nest of botflies in one of my playrooms, and I was itching to put someone in a cage full of them. Just the thought of it made me shiver with delight. It would be otherworldly. Anastasia was a sadistic, venomous child. She had her many uses, and she was very entertaining, but I itched to see her writhe in pain. The thought of her beautiful face being marred by botflies filled my daydreams. Unfortunately, this would only remain a fantasy. Anastasia was too much of a popular figure for me to touch. She modeled these days, appearing in London, Milan, Paris, and Seoul Fashion Week. We'd both been on the cover of Vogue Korea together, and she was in campaigns and ads running for popular brands all over the world. She was also now the brand ambassador for Kang Beauty, a skincare line that Haikyo had launched. Simply, hurting Anastasia wasn't worth it at the moment, and she was too fun for me to break just yet. Who would think that such a vile, murderous creature existed in this young and gorgeous girl? She was a dream pet. Every day she surprised me more and more, and I was feeling differently towards her. As that perturbing thought came to my mind, from the corner of my vision, I saw yellow eyes and the most revolting grin laughing at me from the car window. I quickly turned around, my heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Had I imagined it? Are you okay? Anastasia gave me a concerned look as she dabbed my face with her handkerchief. You're sweating. She continued to wipe my face, her clear, soft skin inches from mine as she leaned closer, and I began to feel my heart pound for a different reason. Don't give in to it. Don't forget. Anastasia looked up at me confused. Don't forget what? What are you talking about? Did I just say something? Anastasia nodded. You don't remember? Are you not feeling well? Maybe I wasn't. I felt a deep-seated anger and the bizarre feeling like I was forgetting something important. But I had never forgotten anything in both my lives. After dwelling on this, in the end, I could only let it go. If it was something I needed to remember, I would remember, eventually. The limousine took us to the airport, and from there we got on the Kang family private jet to Geppetto. Kapato was a small private island in Seogwipo, South Korea, off the coast of Jeju Island, and it was home to Trinity High, the most elite high school in Asia. Stepping out of the plane, I enjoyed the refreshing tropical air. Just seeing the gorgeous island made the hour-long flight worth it. As I stepped down, I extended my hand to Anastasia and escorted her down the steps alongside me. Of course, I only did this because of the cameras. Cameras flashed. There was at least 100 different photographers. Paparazzi normally love to follow us, but of course, none of the students who attended Trinity High were normal. All were worth astounding media attention. Though it was expected that there would be this many reporters, it looked like they were scoping out the whole airport for any students that landed. Paparazzi respectfully took photos of us from a distance. Waiting for us on the tarmac was a young Caucasian gentleman, fiery ginger hair, was wearing a tux with a long cane in his hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Kang-ho and Princess Anastasia. I am Frederick, the head of the Gregory boarding house that you both will be residing in. It's a pleasure to meet you. Please look after us for the next few years." But politely, Anastasia parroted my words while looking around bored. "Come along with me. There are other Gregory boarding house residents who have also arrived." He escorted us to a luxurious airport lounge with red velvet seats, chandeliers, a band and bar. There were 10 other students sitting in the lounge already. I recognized 4 of them. There was Prince Free Indraditya of Sukhothai, the youngest son of the King of Thailand, and Misahito, the youngest prince of Japan, Cheon Jung-hwa, his father was the Korean Minister of Defense, and Tak Mi-kyung, the heiress to the Korea Air Airline. On spotting me and Anastasia, Mi-kyung stood up with excitement. "If it isn't the devil himself," she laughed. "Of course, you would be the last to arrive, fashionably late as ever." Jung-hwa smirked. Prince Misahito and Prince Free just nodded at us. We sat down at the large table with them, and immediately a waiter asked me if I wanted anything. I ordered a water, while Anastasia, being a sweet tooth, got a milkshake. As we ordered, I noticed that we were sitting a distance away from the other table of 6 students. Those other students were nervously glancing at us, as if too afraid to speak. "Who are they?" I asked. "Nobody's, literally." Jung-hwa sighed. "The charity cases." Mi-kyung sneered. "Didn't you hear? This year, Trinity launched their scholarship program for gifted students, giving free tuition, room and board to the top 6 students who passed the entrance exam. That's them." "Oh, I see." I smiled as my eyes flickered and stared at the students. One of them had to be Song Jae. Chapter 56. Forgotten Bet 3. It was almost natural, the way we made eye contact. Perhaps too natural. The moment I glanced at the other table, he also glanced towards me. For some reason, his gaze felt familiar, extremely familiar. But I knew this was my first time seeing him, seeing Song Jae. Song Jae's appearance was exactly what you would expect from a main character written by a boring woman in her 20s. He was needlessly and uniquely handsome. He had warm, large doe eyes. One was dark brown with a hint of yellow, while the other was extremely pale and looked slightly purple. His hair was silky. The left side was jet black, while the right was a pale white. Yes, in the novel it was mentioned that Song Jae had partial albinism. It was another reason for Kang-ho to bully him in the story, childishly calling Song Jae names like Dokebi. Of course, the dumb name-calling didn't affect Song Jae much. He was used to it. Song Jae had spent his whole life being ostracized by others for his unusual appearance. It was another obstacle that he had to overcome in the early parts of the story. Korea is a homogeneous country, and its citizens can often be ignorant towards those that look and act differently from themselves. Children are especially sensitive to even slight differences, and that leads to extreme bullying, school violence, and harassment cases. If someone had such an obviously different appearance like Song Jae, one could only imagine the abuse he had suffered up until this point. Yet for someone who should have been so traumatized by life, he was confident and unusually nice. The moment our eyes met, he gave me the most unnervingly gentle smile. I had never met anyone so happy to see me. He just radiated warmth and joy. I was repulsed. Such innocence. It didn't feel real. You would think he'd lived a life of luxury and privilege that had never touched filth, but I knew that wasn't true. Songjay must have lived on the border of poverty, and he must have witnessed all kinds of depravity, yet could still smile like that. Hated that smile. I grinned back at him, even raising my hand to wave slightly. Anastasia immediately noticed my movement and whipped her head to look at Songjay. The moment she saw him, I noticed her eyes widen. Her jaw went slack as she quietly gasped. She stared with a dumbstruck expression. She was clearly transfixed by him. She had never stared at me like that. I felt a foreign emotion. Was that jealousy? That wasn't right. Why would I be jealous? It was like someone was giving me these emotions. They never felt like my own. They never felt right. Oh, you've seen him, the hottie. Mi-kyung laughed. With looks like that, he's the only peasant I don't mind being here. I'll make him my bitch before the term ends. Really? And how do you plan to do that? I leaned closer to her with curiosity. She laughed. Using the foolproof method I always do. Give the pet some attention. Do gifts and he'll be begging for me. Poor hotties like him are all the same. That's it. Huh. What do you mean? I mean you could be a bit more creative. Buying gifts seems like you're the one wasting your time and money. You're the bitch, and if that's how you've been dealing with all your men, I feel bad for you. Respect yourself more. That's embarrassing. The table fell silent. Mi-kyung's face flushed red, blood rushing to even the tips of her ears. Prince Misahito began to chuckle. It's good to know you haven't changed, Ho. Your mouth is as venomous as ever. The media and public always praise you for being nice and charitable. If only they knew how mean you can be. Moon? I tilted my head with confusion. I was being honest. Prince Misahito laughed even louder. Mi-kyung couldn't stand it anymore and stormed off, leaving the table, running to the powder room. Internally, I rolled my eyes. As I had grown older, I had stopped filtering myself as much around people I didn't value. While being nice and innocent was fine while young, with age, it was less valuable. Of course, that didn't mean I could throw away all my defenses. In fact, more masks were needed. Sorry to disturb, but I want to introduce myself. Songjay had approached our table. The moment he came near us, Anastasia visibly became more alert, sitting up straighter and even fluttering her eyes at him. He flashed a charmingly kind smile at us. My name is Songjay. I'm a first year on the gifted scholarship scheme. I hope we can spend a fantastic 3 years together. Before the others could react, I greeted him first, extending my hand to him. Lovely to meet you. My name is Kang Ho. Let's enjoy the next few years together. Songjay's smile widened into a beaming grin, and he vigorously shook my hand. His fingers were surprisingly tough. They looked like they would be smooth, but upon shaking them, I could feel the hard calluses of a working man. I know who you are. Songjay grinned. I'm a big fan, and actually my uncle used to be one of your nannies, although a really long time ago. As Songjay continued to babble, I began to feel lightheaded. This entire day since I had woken up, no maybe for the last 7 years, or maybe from the beginning. Something had been wrong. I had been waiting for this moment, the moment to meet Songjay, start twisting his life to prove a point. But why had I cared? He was just some teenager. He posed no threat to me. He had no worth to me. Yet I had been subconsciously following the story and looking forward to meeting him and antagonizing him. But wasn't he, like most beings, beneath me? When had I started valuing such people? From Anastasia to the snobs around me, I felt dizzy. For years I had been forgetting something just out of reach. And in that moment, as I stared at Songjay, it all came back to me. This foolishly fabulous game. Well, it seems wiping your memory will no longer work. You really do have a tough soul, Daniel. People around me had frozen. Time had stopped. The only one moving was Songjay, but he looked different now. His mismatched eyes had turned bright, dirty yellow, and his teeth had become long and jagged. The room became dark as his gigantic wings obscured the lights. Malakota! I yelled. No need to wear out my name, dear. I'm right here. I glared at the demon and hugged my chest. I couldn't control myself. I was about to burst into laughter. How could I have forgotten this fantastic bet? In the end, I lost myself, and raucous, hearty chuckles erupted from my lips. You nearly had me. I almost started believing that those emotions you implanted were really mine. That was really dumb of you. Dumb. Malakota gnashed its teeth and slinked towards me. Its sharp nails gripped my shoulders and dug into my flesh. For 15 years, you couldn't see through the fog, and you were on the path of reform, Daniel. If anything, I have succeeded and proven that you are capable of feeling. You're just like other mortals, nothing more or less." I sneered. "You're really frustrated, I can tell." The game had only just begun.